Today's video we are going to be making a ring box with some KUMIKO in it. These KUMIKO panels that you're seeing in the video are from my demonstration video of my KUMIKO jig, which I'm not super happy with. That's why I never made a video about it. Well, I never made a video on how I actually made it. I'm kind of fine-tuning the accuracy of it, I guess, and I will be making a video whenever I get it to where I'm happy with it, later on probably. I chose white oak for this box in particular. I made another one out of walnut, which I didn't really include much in the video. These are offcuts from a dining room table that I'm going to be making in the future. I don't know if it's the near future or if it's going to be a little bit later on before I build this dining room table. I've got to build a router table first, so that way I can do the sliding dovetails for the bottom. I cut them to their rough width first, and then I'm going to go ahead and resaw them so that way I can get two pieces out of one piece, I guess, if that makes sense. Always wear a respirator and my hearing protection. Forget about my eyes, I'll just get sawdust all in my eyes, whatever. Also, my table saw really isn't that powerful, so I usually make multiple cuts in white oak just about every time, especially when I'm resawing. And I want to say this, I don't like resawing on the table saw. A, it's dangerous, and B, it's a lot of wasted material usually. So if you have a bandsaw, resaw on the bandsaw. I like to get my pieces close to their final dimension in like the width and length before I go ahead and flatten, because the smaller the piece, the less material that you waste whenever you actually go to flatten it. And obviously I run it on the joiner on the face, and then I will edge join it after the face is flat. I really enjoyed this project. It's always nice to be able to incorporate some of the KUMIKO that I've done in a project, and I've done this actually a lot. And you guys are going to see a really cool project that I've been doing, and it has a really cool intricate KUMIKO panel in it as well. And speaking of KUMIKO, we're going to be doing a whole lot more KUMIKO here in the future. I want to do really big panels and maybe a new tool cabinet with some really cool, really intricate KUMIKO on the front panels. So here you can see I'm resawing, and again, I hate doing this on the table saw, but I don't have a good bandsaw, so this is the way that I do it. And if there's ever a good time to wear a respirator, it is right now, because this resawing lumber really shoots dust everywhere, especially if you don't have a dust collecting system hooked up to your table saw like I don't. I need to get a hose or some ductwork going to my table saw from a big dust collector, as you can see in the background there. I just don't have that set up yet. And after I resaw, most of the time whenever you resaw lumber, it wants to move and it wants to warp, and you relieve stress in the wood. So I go back and I re-flatten it and run it through the thickness planner and bring it down to its final thickness. Sometimes I'll even leave the wood out for maybe a day or two before I go and flatten it and bring it to its final thickness, but in this case, since the pieces were so small, I didn't do that. It is now time to put the blade at 45 degrees so that way I can cut the miters. Guys, if you don't have a crosscut sled and you have a table saw, really don't know what you're doing, you gotta build one. It's the best thing that you will do for your table saw. Here's a really good tip. I set my sliding T-bevel at exactly 45 degrees, and I check to see if my miter is perfect, and usually it's not, and I will actually move the blade very slight amounts multiple times to get it perfect. I use a stop block here on my crosscut sled so that way my parts are the exact same size. For this project, it wasn't square exactly, so there's side pieces that are a little bit smaller than the top and bottom pieces, I guess. So I left the pieces just a little bit oversized in their width, so that way I could come back and I could rip them to their final width here. So like I said before, I was also working on a walnut box just like this one, so I'm a little bit ahead with that box compared to where I'm at this point in the video on the white oak box. So I've learned a little bit from my mistakes, and I'm perfectly sizing the grooves for the glass here, so that's kind of what I'm looking at. Now I'm going to take out my crosscut blade and put in a rip blade, and the reason for it is because the rip blade has actually a really thin kerf, and it's almost the same thickness as the glass, which is kind of important. But it's just a little bit thicker than the glass, so the glass almost has a little bit of slop, so that's why later on in the video you'll see me put a little bit of super glue to hold it in place, and this was actually a big mistake and I should not have done it that way. So here I'm cutting the grooves for the pieces of glass. There was actually a lot that went on behind the scenes for this. There's obviously two pieces of glass that hold the KUMIKO panel in place, and the distance between those two pieces of glass has to be perfect, so that way there's not much slop for the KUMIKO panel. So there's a lot of test fitting on a scrap piece to make sure that this would fit perfect. So this is where we are in the project so far. As you can tell, there is the walnut box in the background. I actually had to get that box done before I got the white oak box because they were both Christmas presents and one had to be done sooner than the other. So that's why I didn't get an in shot for both of the boxes, which you'll see later on in the video. Now this tool that I'm showing you right here is a Mentori Kana, and it is a chamfer plane, and it is one of my favorite tools. And if you've ever watched any of my videos prior to this one, you will know that I use this tool on everything. Every project that I ever do, this tool comes out, and I absolutely love it. There's a link in the description to where I got it. A guy named Nobori, I believe that's how you pronounce his name. I've bought just about all my Japanese tools from him, and he's an awesome guy, so go buy some Japanese tools from him for sure. I couldn't really decide what I wanted to use for a bottom panel, so I pulled out this really nice piece of pine. It had some nice straight grain, and I figured my logo would burn really well in it, so that's what I chose. And here I am flattening, and I will be thicknessing and cutting it to final dimension on the table saw. These videos take me a very long time to make. Pulling out the camera, doing all the shots, takes a lot of time on its own, and obviously the projects take a long time on their own. I do this for you guys, so make sure to leave a like, make sure to subscribe, and if you really enjoy it, make sure to share it with your friends. I would really appreciate it. And also thank you guys so much for 5,000 subscribers. That is awesome. My next milestone will be 10,000, so I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully I can get there pretty soon. So as you can see there, I actually cut the groove for the bottom panel on the table saw, of course, but I slowly took off a little bit at a time until that bottom panel fit absolutely perfect. So now it is time for the glue up, and as you can see, here's the super glue that I used, and I really wish I wouldn't have used it at this point. It's because I got a little bit of glue squeezed out on the inside of the glass, and there's nothing you can do after that happens. So it's in there, you can see it, and I'm not a huge fan of it, but the box turned out great. The person I made it for really liked it, so I won't beat myself up too much about it. But yeah, if I ever made this box again, absolutely would not put the super glue in the grooves. I would just leave it having a little bit of play in the glass before I would have any more glue squeeze out, because that was a nightmare. Something that I didn't show in the video here is I actually put a little drop of wood glue on the bottom of the KUMIKO panel, and that actually held it in place against the bottom piece of the glass there, and that was actually a really good idea, and I wish I would have used just regular wood glue in the grooves for the glass instead of super glue, because it would have worked just as well. I will say though, the glue up on this box was not frustrating at all. It went together absolutely perfect, so I'm really happy about that. I use this really cool clamp that I actually got from Walmart. It works really well. It's kind of like a miter clamp. I'm not exactly sure what to call it, but they have it at Harbor Freight, they have it at Walmart, they have it at Lowe's. This is a really cool clamp, and if you're going to be doing little cases like this, or even big cases, I would actually recommend it. It's really good, and it worked pretty well. It is now time to cut the lid off, and I actually put a piece of MDF on the table and clamp it down so that way I don't have my plate bending or anything, so I'll make sure that I get it as close to perfect as I can whenever I cut it off, so that means I don't have to sand as much, which I still ended up having to sand quite a lot because, well, I don't actually know, but I had to sand a lot, and you guys will see that, and that's actually key to making a box like this. Here are the pieces for the splines. I have maple and walnut splines. Obviously the maple will be for the walnut box that you will see a little bit later on. I think I showed a final result of it here later. And obviously the walnut splines will be for this white oak box, and I think it turned out absolutely great. So this is actually how I cut the spline holes, or the spline slots, and just this little 45-degree jig. It's not too difficult just by looking at it. You can kind of tell how I made it, but I just make sure it's dead in the center on the lid, and you will see how I mark out for the actual case of the ring box. I just kind of divide it into thirds, I guess you would say, and I take my square and I make sure that line comes all the way about halfway up the box, so that way I can see it on the jig and I can make those cuts pretty accurately. I use a little bit of double stick tape to add like a little fence to my jig, and this works absolutely perfect, as you will see. I don't run the blade back through the kerf because I don't want that kerf to get any wider than it is, because the splines are made absolutely perfect to fit that kerf. And again, I have a little like crosscut jig that I have set up for my Japanese saws, and this thing works perfect. There's not really too much to it either. I add a little bit of glue to the splines themselves. and I also add a little bit of glue inside of the little spline slot, I guess you would call it. The hardest part about installing these splines is the glue actually gets in the way from being able to tell if it's fully seated on both sides. Because if you hit it harder on one side or the other, it will actually make it kind of rotate a little bit and there'll be a gap. And I only had one of those in this box, and I wish I didn't, but I actually ended up filling it with some walnut dust and some glue. Ended up being invisible, so it is alright. Here is the Walnut Box Completed. This is not too much different from the White Oak box, but it doesn't have the interior pieces that hold a ring. It's just a keepsake box, so the White Oak box goes just a little bit farther. So to cut off the splines, I'm just using my crosscut saw, so nothing too fancy. I don't get all the way down like flush. I use the hand plane to do that. Always come from the outside in, because if you don't, you'll break off that corner of the spline and there will be a gap there and you will be very unhappy. It's happened to me plenty of times and I've kind of learned my lesson at this point. So I'm doing this method again where I make sure that my blade is exactly 45 and it works perfect every time. To make the interior pieces, all I do is the same thing that I did to make the actual box. I slowly take off a little bit on the length to make sure that it fits perfect inside the box. See, it's too tight there. Take a little bit off and it will fit perfect. And this is how I flush everything up. You want these pieces to actually fit 100% perfect. You want to spend a lot of time on this, so that way the lid will actually fit kind of like a piston fit on top of the box. This part right here I would consider actually the most important part in this whole box. I put a big piece of sandpaper down on a flat surface, and in this case I'm using my table saw top, and where the lid and the box meet, I want it to be dead flat and parallel. So really the only way I can think of without a drum sander or something like that to do it is just to do it this way, and I gotta tell you, it worked perfect, as you will see a little bit later. You might have also seen that I was spinning it, and the reason I did that is because if you don't, you will actually end up creating low spots on the corners, and you definitely don't want that. So spin it to get rid of that issue. So that's the fit I want, and as you can see, all that sanding was worth it. It's almost seamless, and that is absolutely perfect. So I'm really glad that I sanded it down like that. And this is the first time I'm actually doing it that way, and I got some really good results doing that. Looks really nice and clean. Now would be a good time to burn my logo into the bottom panel. This is actually the first time I've ever burnt my logo into anything, so it was pretty interesting, and I actually really liked it, and I wish I'd have been doing this the whole time, because stamping is a little bit hard to do and you don't see it as much, so I really like burning it. It looks great. Forget holding a torch to it, takes way too long. I just put it on the stove, leave it there for about 15 minutes, come back, make sure I don't forget it and burn the house down. But works absolutely perfect. It gets to a great temperature, and I hold it on there for about 10 seconds and it's pretty much perfect. And that's what a $250 stamp looks like. Oh my gosh, did I really spend that much? The finish that I chose was just some really simple wipe on poly. I think it looked really good. I probably should have done a few more coats, but I liked how it turned out, so I won't complain too much. Here is some burlap material that I got from Walmart. I thought it'd be awesome. I've seen a couple boxes online using this as like the ring holder thing, and so I decided I would give it a shot. And I didn't. This is actually hard to do because you got to figure out how much you need to roll up to actually fill in that space, and luckily I got it first try, so I didn't have to waste a bunch of this burlap material. I still have a bunch left over. All I did was actually add a drop of glue in the bottom of the box, and that held it in place. I absolutely love the color combination with the burlap material, with the poplar interior, the white oak, and the walnut splines. They're just such a nice color combination. This has to be probably one of my favorite projects that I've done up to this point. I absolutely love white oak, so anytime I build anything out of white oak, I'm always absolutely in love with it. So this was a really fun one, and I'll probably make some similar projects to this in the future. So with that, it is complete, and I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. And as I said before, leave a like, make sure to leave a comment, and I will see you guys next time.